for all of you that don't know me, I'm Guilbault. I am the director of the Cohasset Housing Authority. This is my staff. This is Nancy Abadessa. She is our resident service coordinator, which is actually a brand new position that has been a godsend. And then Kathy Stimson is the administrative assistant. So both of them started in October. I became the director in July of last year. Just to give you a little history, I just took over in July. However, I've been in the industry for 25 years, 18 of them being an executive director at several different housing authorities. I took over Cohasset in July. It was being managed by Norwell Housing Authority. The Norwell Housing Authority director retired. So the job became open, and I had been working there as a consultant with Colleen. Colleen is a very good friend of mine. She was the director. So when the job came up, I applied for it, and here I am. So I'm going to go over CHAMP. I want to see what questions people want answered, because I'm going to tell you right now, I can talk forever. And I know this stuff like the back of my hand. Thanks. So I actually set my alarm for 1:50, so it would like give me a 10-minute reminder that I need to stop. So I'm just going to see, does anyone have any questions that I want to make sure that I cover to do with CHAMP? So is everybody familiar with what CHAMP even is? Sort of. Sort of. Anybody nod? How about that? Yeah. No?
Yeah, no, I'd like to hear.
Okay, so Anna okay, so CHAMP it's an acronym, and it is the Common Housing Application for Massachusetts Programs. So this was implemented, I think, back in 2019. I was at the Housing Authority I was working at the time. I was on the pilot program for this system. So previous to CHAMP, every housing authority had their own waiting list, their own application. Everything was kind of kept local. Anybody could apply. Guhowever, we had a little bit more oversight when it was at the housing authority level. However, thanks to Governor Deval Patrick, before he left, he passed Chapter 235, which gave several rules to do with housing authorities, and one of them was to have a centralized waiting list. So the centralized waiting list now, anybody can apply you could always apply at any town, but you used to have to fill out an application at every housing authority that you wanted to apply to. Now you fill out one application, and I gave everybody a copy of one. It's 27 pages, because why not? Everybody has nothing else to do for look at 27 pages. So this comes from the state. They put it together. On here, you fill out the application, and then it lists all the cities and towns that have state low-income housing. So this is state only. CHAMP is for state only. It's not for federal. So it's just a state program. So you fill out the application. You can either do it on paper or you can do it online. And there's a link on the form I passed out, and then there's a link on the application as well. So you can fill it out and drop it off at any housing authority. Even if you're not applying to that housing authority, we have to upload it into the system for you. Or you can do it directly yourself online. So you go in, you fill it out, you check off all the cities or towns that you want to apply to, and you are put on all those waiting lists. You're only put on the waiting list of the towns that you chose. I was reading something on Facebook last night, different town, and they were talking about the CHAMP waiting list, and everybody's like, oh no, once you fill it out, you're on every 242 town, and you're not. You have to decide which ones you want to apply to. I will say, I believe before CHAMP, Cohasset was probably lucky if they had, Taffy might know, 50 or 100 people on the waiting list. We have 4,400 now. The reason being is a couple of reasons. We're C for Cohasset, so as people are going through, it's one of the top ones, and then they get tired and they stop checking them off. We screen a lot of people, and a lot of people don't follow through. They don't even know what Cohasset is, but they check it off, so we have to go through the process. I tried to give you some information to do with eligibility requirements for housing. So it's based on age, income, and handicap. So age, you have to be 60 years or older. It's not 62, that's federal housing. A lot of people think it's 62, but you have to be 60 or older. And the handicap is if you're under the age of 60, you have to have a qualifying disability. And then income, you have to fall within the income's limits for our district. So I did put on the second page of one of the forms I gave you. For one person, the net income limit, it is $82,950. And for two people, it's $94,800. This is different in all of the towns. I used to be the director of several different towns, but I was the director of Holbrook and Avon at the same time. And Avon fell under Brockton's limits, and Holbrook fell under Boston, which Cohasset falls under, and there was a huge difference. I think it was like 50 or 60,000 in Avon. So just because you might not be eligible in one town, you could be based on income in another town because it's based on the city or town that you're applying to. Every state housing authority has to have 13.5% of their units filled with people under the age of 60. I don't know where the number came from. It was done long before I got into housing. It is a rule. We have to have 13.5% of our units filled with people under the age of 60. A lot of people don't understand that. You know, I have several people say, you know, why is this young person living here? You know, this is elderly housing. Well, it is elderly housing. However, we're required to have 13.5%. And then I hear that, well, they don't have a disability. They don't have anything wrong with them. Disabilities aren't visual all the time. So I try to instill that in my residents and applicants so that they kind of can understand why there are people that live there under the age of 60. So 13.5% have to be under 60, and the other percentage has to be 60 and over. So for Cohasset, we have to have, I think it comes out to 8.64 units that we have to fill with people under the age of 60. When we become below that number, we have to house people. We have to do one young and disabled. Then the next unit will go to an elderly. Then the next unit will go to a young and disabled until we get to the 13.5%. So the way it works is you have to fill out the CHAMP application, like I gave to everybody. You get in there, if you apply, whether you apply online or you fill it out you fill it out and you hand it to us, you're going to get a control number, an ID number. They used to be called control numbers. An ID number, that is just for you. Whenever you're going to call a housing authority to find out where you are on the list, you have to have your ID number. If not, they're going to ask you for your date of birth and Social Security. We can't really look anything up without that information. And just so everyone knows, because I know there's a lot of people that are on the waiting list that don't understand, they'll call and they'll say, I want to know what number I am on the waiting list. So today, right now, I could tell you you're 572. Call me back in 5 minutes, that number's going to change. Because more people are applying, so the number really is useless. That's what I tell people, but we have to give you one. There's certain preferences and priorities that bring you closer to the top of the list. So priority-wise would be an emergency applicant, someone who's homeless and qualifies for the definition of homeless emergency. So in order to qualify for that, you have to be able to prove that you were displaced due to no fault of your own. So a couple examples would be domestic abuse. You've fled your abuser, you've lost your housing, you're now in need of housing. Somebody was living in a place where it was condemned, and they now have to, they had to leave because the Board of Health came in and told them they have to leave and they have nowhere to go. You do have to remember, oh, my microphone, where did it go? There we go. You do have to remember, when you do apply for emergency, you have to be able to back up what your emergency is and have verification. So, a lot of times, in a lot of towns that I've worked in, I'll get phone calls from the Council on Aging, and they'll say, I've got this couple, they're living in their car. in our parking lot of the town hall. This happened in one of the towns I worked in. They're emergency, you have vacancies, can't you get them in? And I said, well, first they have to fill out an application, and then they have to determine if they qualify for the emergency preference. And their answer is always, well, they're living in the car, so of course they. I said, yes, but there's rules and whatnot, so they don't. If they were evicted for non-payment of rent, you're probably not, unless, I won't say I have housed people with that. One situation that comes to mind is it was a couple who, he owned his own business. Unfortunately, he was diagnosed with cancer and had to give up his business. And because he was doing treatments, they could not keep up with their condo rent. So initially they were denied because it was for non-payment of rent is why they were evicted. However, when you're denied a preference or a priority or even housing, you can file a grievance and come in and meet with the director. So I met with them and they gave me plenty of documentation from their doctor, bills and whatnot to show, listen, I got sick. We couldn't keep up with $2,400 rent, living on Social Security. So it's very strict, and the state has taken over determining the eligibility for priority preferences. So there's a third party, it's called ASG, I think they're out of Lowell, I forget. So when someone applies and they apply for emergency, you're going to get a letter from ASG. It's going to say, based on what you applied for, this is the documentation we're going to need to back up verification that this was due to no fault of your own. If you fail to turn that paperwork in, or it's not enough paperwork, they can deny you for the emergency priority. You don't necessarily get removed from the list, but you're only on the list as a standard applicant. The next is preference, and so its priority is the highest, which would be homeless emergency, and preference is either a local or a veteran. So locals get preference, veterans get preference. Veterans get preference in any town they apply to. That changed a few years ago. It used to only be the town they lived in did they get preference, but now they get it in any town that they apply to. They actually beat out a local. So if you applied and you're a local and you applied and you're a veteran, he's going to beat you out even if you applied first.
You should.
Yeah. And if you're a local vet, they beat out both of you because now you have a double preference. And a spouse of a veteran also gets the veteran's preference as well. I won't get into family. So Cohasset only has elderly housing. Some housing authorities have family housing. We only have elderly housing. So I will tell you, I just had a board meeting last week, and I always give them the numbers of our waiting list. And it's sad to say, but I think between young and disabled and elderly, I don't even know if we have 6 people on our waiting list that are locals, believe it or not. I don't know why. I don't know. Yes.
Okay, so I filled out the application,
Yep.
and another friend of mine did too. So when you get to the option where you choose which location, you put Cohasset in, and then it shows you, show me housing in my preferred location, which is Cohasset,
Yep.
right? What time do you need, public housing, yada, yada, yada. It says there are no selections in Cohasset available. Hold up. There, I just lost it. It says, Cohasset Housing Authority has no units in this housing authority to match your search.
Okay, and I'll tell you why.
Yep.
So what happened, and we had to fight for this. So Cohasset Housing Authority only has studio units. It's one large area. We don't have 1-bedroom units. And from my understanding and the research I've done, we're about the only city or town in Massachusetts that has studio apartments. So what was happening was people that wanted 1 bedroom would apply at Cohasset because it listed on the CHAMP application that we had 1 bedroom. When we'd get to those people and I would send them all the paperwork and I'd have them come in and show them a unit if they were found eligible, they'd say, I don't want a studio. I wanted 1 bedroom. So we fought, the board did, we actually went through a state rep to get the application changed so that it only listed studio, because we have so many people on our waiting list that aren't interested in living in a studio, so we have to go through the process of screening them all, and then I get to the end, and they don't even want a studio unit. So we have requested that in CHAMP, if you check off 1 bedroom, it will come up and give you a message that says Cohasset does not have 1 bedrooms. It should state, now, this is a state program, you know, I don't have anything to do with setting up CHAMP. It should say they only have 1 bedroom. So I'm assuming you checked off 1 bedroom.
Yep, and then
Okay.
I went back, first I did studio, and then I went back and did 1
Yep.
bedroom. So it doesn't give me the opportunity to go further because my housing search is in Cohasset. And then if you go to select other housing authorities, you know, say Hingham comes first, Hingham Hall, obviously. You know, and it goes mileage away from where your location is. So they just have all warning signs, like you can't even apply for that. It does not have your requested bedrooms.
So it doesn't let you check it off, though?
Nope, so I can't. Go
Okay, well, that's good to know, because basically what we wanted it to do was go, hello,
Yeah.
we don't have 1-bedroom units, but if you want to apply for studio, you can. So that's a glitch. That shouldn't be.
It's a glitch, so it should say, I should be able to say within Cohasset, and then even if they're, you know, even if it pops up that there's a wait list, then my application will go through. So my application is pending, because I have to choose public housing in like Hingham, Hall, Quincy in order to proceed.
So you know, I think one way around that you could do, in the question where it asks how many bedrooms you want, there is an option for studio now, is there?
Yeah.
I'm asking because there never used to be.
Yeah, there was, yeah.
So if you go back and check off, you can check off more than 1. So if you check off studio and 1 bedroom, you should be able to apply in Cohasset.
Yeah, I did all that. I kept going back and forth. It just won't let me proceed.
It's not super user-friendly. It isn't.
Was it better to fill, would you suggest filling this out?
Yes,
Okay.
I would.
And then just take it off and
Or if you want to make an appointment and come to the Housing Authority,
Perfect.
we can work with you to do that.
Excellent.
Because we can go in, we can't, just so you know, so if you've already applied, you're in the system, and you called us on the phone and said, you know, I can't seem to check off Cohasset, can you go in and do it for me? We can't do it without written authorization.
Okay.
Just because we can't go in and play around with, we have to show that you asked me to do it.
Perfect.
Basically, I have to, you know, show the state that you told me to do that.
All right.
So call the office, make an appointment.
Of course.
Come in, and Kathy or myself will help you with that.
Excellent.
Kathy's still learning. So it probably will be me, but you should be able to do that. So I'm glad that you brought that up, because we worked to get them to put studio in there, because I really think it's going to. It gets very. So when I have a vacant unit, I have to it's called pull a list. So I go in and I say, pull 50 people. So I have to pull at least 50 people. In order to not get dinged from the state. So the way it works is, if I have a vacant unit and we don't get it filled in the amount of time that the state gives us, I have to go in and request a waiver. If I don't pull at least 50 people and I don't fill that unit in the time frame, I'm going to get dinged unless I pull 50 or more people. I don't know why, but that's how they have it set up. So I always pull 50 people. But of those 50 people, I probably have 10 to 20 people that the first 10 to 20 people are all emergencies.
Sure.
However, I could probably count on one hand, since I've been at Cohasset, how many emergencies I've housed. Number 1, they sometimes don't respond. Number 2, their mail is returned to us because they maybe were in a shelter and now they're not there anymore. Or they've already been housed. So what happens is we struggle with the centralized waiting list, because I pull a list, Hingham pulls a list, Situate pulls a list, you're on all 3 of those and you're an emergency, you're getting pulled on all those lists, and we're all screening you.
How do you stay off those lists?
So you don't check it if you go in and deselect it. So you can change your selections at any time, of course not with this particular glitch. But you can go in, and say, you know what, I've heard not good things about Hingham, not that I'm saying there's anything bad, I'm just picking the town. I'd rather not apply there. You can uncheck it, you'll be taken off. If you've already been pulled on a list, they may have already sent you a tenant screening letter. So what happens is when we pull a list, it brings up the 50 people, and it automatically puts together, it's called a tenant screening packet. So everybody gets a packet, and you either get it mailed to you, or when you apply in CHAMP, you can request no mailings, and everything gets emailed to you. So when I go to print all the tenant screening packets, if you said you only want it by email, when I pulled that list, it went to you via email, so I'm not going to have a hard copy to mail to you. We can always reproduce that. If you came in and said, I can't print it, we can reproduce it for you. And what it is it's going to be a packet, and it's going to include what's called a supplemental application. So the initial application is really just to get you in the system. It's your age, it's your income, and your handicap. That gets you in the system. Then when we go to screen you, now we request all the backup documentation. We request all of your income information. We request your landlord history. And there's more information that's gathered. This is kind of just the preliminary to get you put on the list. And did I answer your questions on all that, or did you have another one?
I do.
Yep.
When it comes to income.
Yep.
And this just is to make everybody laugh, Say somebody's in there and, your income, and then all of a sudden, your rich aunt dies and, leaves you $20,000. Does that affect your
Tenancy.
And
Or eligibility?
Correct.
Okay, so there's a couple answers to that.
I'm hoping
My first answer is no.
Okay.
But it depends.
Right.
So we have regulations that we follow. It's CMR 760 5.0 and 6.0. So one of them is eligibility income-wise, and then one is continued occupancy.
Yep.
Okay, so let's say you moved in.
I know Situate does that, because I know people that do a lot of 1099 contract work. So they're in with that thing, and then as soon as they're paid or they pay their taxes, the government's automatically informed, and then they'll get a letter. Instead of, say your rent was $650, it's gonna go up to $825 this month.
Right.
So it's based upon that. I didn't know if Cohasset was that.
We're all the same.
They're all the
state.
That's
I don't know if they have federal, so I don't want to speak for them.
Yeah, me either.
But state-wise,
Yeah.
we're all the same.
So that doesn't, you're never gonna be, like, if you're in there and then all of a sudden, say something crazy happens and you get this great job that's paying you for 2 years, like a bunch of money, would you still be able to live there?
It would depend.
Because it would have to be under that $82,000.
Right, so there's kind of a lot of answers to that, because it depends on the situation, but it's a good question. So, you live in there, you're making on Social Security, I'm just throwing out a number, $30,000, okay? Your great aunt dies, leaves you $50,000, okay? God bless your great aunt. Usually inheritances are not included as income at all. It all depends on what you give us for paperwork. We have to investigate it. So normally, now, and this has happened, I don't know if everybody's familiar with most state pensions, like myself, when you're receiving a state pension, you could not receive Social Security. Yeah. However, as of January 1st, you can. Yay! So I have a few tenants that are like, oh crap. This is great, but the Housing Authority is going to take some.
Yeah.
So it's going to depend. So it's kind of involved. It's very individual too. So let's just say I have a tenant who's only receiving a state pension. Now they got a letter that says, great news, you're now going to get another $1,000 a month from Social Security. And we decided it goes back to January of 2024. So we're going to send you $12,000. Well, the Housing Authority is going to get 30% of that, basically, at the end of the day. The way it works is, though, if you lived there, so if the letter says we're paying you back to January 1st for 2024, if you moved in prior to that date, we are going to use that as income, and I'll tell you how we break it down. If you moved in December, we can only go back to the date that you moved in and retro that. And it's in the regulations, it kind of breaks it down. And it's lousy because it's basically you get 50,000. We're basically at some point getting, not that, I'm sorry, that was the inheritance. Yeah. But if you got a $12,000 check from Social Security, you lived there during the time frame that they're going back to.
Yeah, they're going to take that as part.
We're going to take that, right. So, yeah, so I don't think, so to get if you would be ineligible. So if you become ineligible, so your rent is figured on an annual basis, so for 12 months, okay? So somebody gets this letter from Social Security, you're getting $12,000. The way we're going to handle it, and I always try to do it in the best interest of the tenant. So there's two ways to do it, and I always go, I compare the two. So we can either look at what you're getting, and I usually figure out what 30% of that is. And then I take it and I do it over an annual. So say the tenant, it came back that in January they should have been receiving this income. We will go back, so the way the regulation is, if you have an increase in income, you have to notify us by the 7th of the following month. So that would be February 7th, and then we can't increase it till the month after. So I'm going to retro back to March.
But everybody's involved, like, you know what's going to happen.
Right, so, yeah. So we're going to go back to March. I'm going to figure out what your rent was. I have to give you 14 days notice, so before I increase your rent.
Yeah.
So if you told me today, I figure it out, I can't increase your rent until May 1st, but I'm going to retro it back to March. I'm going to let you know what that amount is, and you can make the decision if you want to pay, do a repayment agreement. Obviously, we don't expect everybody to pay it up front if you want to do a repayment agreement for that amount. So that comes also to, I'll talk about as far as income. Income gets dicey. I mean, it's so much easier when, I'm sorry, go ahead.
I was wondering if you base all these numbers, you have 30%, on gross income?
So it's net.
Net taxable.
It's net income, but that's involved too. So it's 30% of your net income, but the only deductions that we allow is medical, alimony, child support. I think that's it.
So it's not based on what you file with the federal government?
No, it has nothing to do with that, no. So, and so for medical-wise, it's going to be based on the way we have to do it, because we don't know what, when we redetermine, so we redetermine rent once a year. And when we do the redetermination, we don't know what your prescriptions are going to be or your co-pays are going to be for that year, because it hasn't happened yet. So
even if you can't use them on your federal form, you can use all that.
I don't know what you can use on your federal form.
Well, you have a threshold. If you
Is there, okay.
So much, you have to have so much.
Okay.
So the more you make.
So it's different than that. Okay, so,
It's just kind of like based on the gross, but take away all those other things.
yes, right.
But it's-
And there's a formula. So it's because, of course, the state has to have a formula. So, so the formula is, so if your income is 20,000, it's hard to
Minus the allowable deductions.
but the first 3% doesn't count. I don't know where it came from. It's, yeah,
I mean, Social Security, you're
I don't make me,
Right.
I have to run.
okay, all right, give us a
My
call.
questions, I will. Thank
Okay,
you.
you're welcome. So there's a form. Basically, it's if you had 1,000, the first 3% isn't going to be allowed as a deduction. Okay? Yep.
Does Medicare count in that?
Yes. Yep. So with Medicare and monthly premiums for insurance, we do use the current because we know what that's going to be going forward. But everything else, we don't know. So we use the previous calendar year for your prescriptions, for your co-pays, dental work, eyeglasses, hearing aids, anything that is a prescription. Even if there's also in there, I forget the wordage, but if a doctor prescribes to you a certain vitamin that you have to take because it's an illness that you've been diagnosed with, that could possibly be a deduction. But remember, we have to be able to verify it, so you have to have your receipts for everything.
Well, usually if they have a vitamin or something, they'll write a prescription, which ends up costing you more.
Right.
If you buy it
Over the counter, right. But that's kind of the way we look at it, is if it is a prescription.
Yeah.
So if someone just came in and said, I take 7 different vitamins, here's all my receipts, I need a doctor's note that says because of a certain diagnosis, you need to take these.
That makes sense, if you have arthritis and you need to take it for your bone
Right,
strength.
right.
Yeah.
But we need this,
Authentic.
we need the prescription, and we also need verification of payment. So the interesting thing is, sometimes tenants will just, I think to confuse me, they'll just send a pile of bills, and here you go, these are my medical deductions. Well, when I go through the pile of bills, which is, an ambulance bill, hospital bill, if it is not paid, it is not a deductible.
Yeah.
More times than I'd like to admit, people give us all these bills, but I'm like, well, but I need to see that you paid it. Well, I didn't pay it yet, but I'm gonna. Well, I can't use it as a deduction because you haven't paid it yet. So we do have to have verification of everything. I get audited, the Housing Authority gets audited. Your files can be audited, so I just recently had an audit, and they'll randomly pull 5 tenant folders, and they go through with a fine-tooth comb and make sure that I'm doing my job properly. If I missed anything, I could possibly get a finding for it. So I am a detective when it comes to paperwork. When you also apply for housing and we're screening you, you're required to give us 6 months of bank statements. A lot of people don't really like that. However, this is considered low-income housing. It's based on your income. So we need to see what you have for money and where it's going from, where it's coming from. There's many times that I'll look at bank statements and $5,000 was transferred from this bank account, $5,000 from this, but you didn't give me statements for this other bank account. Whose bank account is, where are you getting money from? Oh, well, that's mine and my daughter's. If your name is on it, it's your asset. Because it is liquid, it can be considered liquid money. Not my rule. People like to yell at me for it. It's not my rule. I have to follow the rules and regulations. So it gets dicey when people have more than just Social Security or a pension. If you own a home, people seem to think we're like nursing homes. You can own a home and possibly qualify for housing. However, we're going to take into consideration, what are you doing with the home when you move in to Cohasset Housing Authority? I will send you a form that says if you own real estate, what are you going to do with it? Are you going to put it on the market? Are you going to rent it? So how it works is, if you got offered a unit and you're going to put your house on the market, we're going to use the value of your home as an asset, but we only use 1% of it. So your home, $300,000, we're only using 1% of that as income over an annual basis. Once you sell your home, it gets more involved. I'm not even going to go there.
Yeah.
It doesn't, yes. Capital gains gets involved. It gets a little, it doesn't mean you can't, though. I've moved many people in that have owned homes, because there is no asset limit in housing, in state public housing. There's no asset limit. You can have $1 million in the bank. I've seen it one time in my life. You can have $1 million in the bank, and you can still get housing. And a lot of tenants, think that it's overkill what we ask for. However, you're only paying 30% of your income. Where are you going to get an apartment? We have 64 units at Cohasset. There's a minimum rent that we have to charge. So you can actually move in if you have no income. If you have no income and you qualify for housing, you can move in. But the minimum rent is $5. A month. So I'm going to tell you, my rents go from $5 up to, I think my highest is, I'm gonna say, I'm guessing, but like 1,900 for the same exact apartment, because it's based on your income. However, if you have no income, normally, I can't speak for other housing authorities, but we follow up monthly. You have to fill out a form, a no-income statement stating, how are you paying for your phone bill? How are you paying, do you have a car? How are you paying the car insurance? You have to tell us, how are you paying all of these things? And if it's a gift from a relative, we're gonna use that as income. Because right now, that's the only income you're getting. So you can have no income and you can have $1 million in the bank and you could still possibly qualify for housing. Part of the question that was asked earlier was, so say you live there and now, I don't know, you're receiving more income from wherever and it's used as income and now you're over the $82,950. We will send you a letter letting you know you no longer qualify for housing. However, we give you a 6-month waiver that says, you have 6 months that you have to look for somewhere else. This is, I could, again, count on one hand how many times this has happened to me in all my years. We'll give you a waiver, and obviously, if you can't find a unit, we will extend the waiver. We're not gonna say, you're out, you don't qualify, get out next month. We have to give you time to find somewhere else, and we work with you. We're in the business of housing. We're not in the business of evicting. For me to evict somebody is a lot of work. It's a lot of money. It's a lot of time, which also equals money. I don't know if everybody is aware, but we are not affiliated with the town of Cohasset at all. We are strictly a state-run facility. So if you have a problem with me, don't call the selectmen because they're not gonna, they can't do anything. I am overseen by a board of 5, which I did put in your paperwork. We have 5 board members. So they oversee me. I have to report to them once a month. We do have a board meeting once a month. So a lot of people think that we're connected. We're not connected with any of the other 40B, elderly, other affordable housing units that might be going on in Cohasset. We only handle, right now, our units located at 60 Elm Street. Sometimes when 40B, there are 40B in Cohasset, right? Yeah. So they usually have to have so many units when they build a complex, I believe, that are 40B. They do need somebody to manage that 40B program. They can ask a housing authority to do that, but the board has to approve it and whatnot. And as of right now, Cohasset does not have, we are not managing any 40B properties. We're just, our location, 60 Elm Street, because I think there's new ones, is there new ones going up?
I don't know, but I was just gonna ask a question about
Yeah.
40B. That's also income driven.
It is.
I find that it has minimums and maximums.
I know nothing about it.
Yeah.
Sorry. I had the program many years ago, and it's changed, so I don't want to speak. I think, you know what?
Subsidize at some, those under market value, the 40B?
I think so, but I don't want to answer to it.
You don't know?
Yeah, I don't.
I can talk to you.
Yeah, there you go. Taffy can tell. I just don't want to misspeak because I don't know.
Because I'm very well aware, I'm on email lists.
Okay.
Maloney Properties is
Okay.
weekly list.
Do they? Okay, yeah, I'm not familiar with it. Sometimes I'll get like emails to do with 40Bs coming up, and I'll post them in our community room, there's sometimes lotteries, I think, with them or something.
Sometimes
Open, right. So I'll post them if they send it to me so that if residents are interested in leaving. Normally, I'll be honest, once someone moves into low-income elderly housing, they don't leave. I mean, unless they're going to move in with family, unless they pass away. They're not going to find a cheaper apartment. They're not going to find me at another house. I'm just kidding. At another housing authority. But they're not going to, $249 for rent. So I got more into the eligibility. Does anyone have any specific CHAMP questions before I know this was about CHAMP. I mean, everyone understands you can fill out a paper application, you can pick one up at our office, you can pick one up at any housing authority office, they're all the same. You can drop it off at any housing authority office, they have to upload it for you in the system and enter you, or you can do it right online. And I don't know, is there any questions to do with just the CHAMP process that I didn't answer? No?
I had a question
Yep.
from someone who's on the Cohasset list.
Yep.
And I guess they got one of these tenant selection letters,
Okay.
and they said they sent it back.
Yep.
And then nothing has happened.
Okay.
Do you want to talk about there is a time?
There is.
Yeah.
Yep. So
It's time critical.
it's time critical. So when we send out, so when I pull a waiting list and I pull 50 people, normally the packets are about 30 to 40 pages long that we have to print. Then we have to fold them, put them in envelopes, and get them in the mail. The state only allows my position 22 hours a week to run a housing authority, which is just crazy.
Yeah.
Kathy's hours are 12 hours a week, and Nancy's are 18 hours a week. So we are very short-staffed. We do the best we can. I tend to work more hours than what I get paid for, but the job can't be done in 22 hours. It can't. Small housing authorities have been fighting for years with the state. They're still basing it on a formula from the 70s when they were built, and things have changed. We're constantly in training to do with CHAMP. That's all I'll say because I'm on camera. So we do all that. So Kathy's only in two days a week. So by the time we print the letters and get them stuffed, so everybody gets an alert saying, hey, you've been pulled, you're going to get a letter. By the time we get those, the letter is dated the day we print it, but then I go into the system and tell them what day I actually mailed it, because it doesn't always get mailed the day that it got printed, because it takes a lot of time and we may not have gotten them all together. So I'll send out a letter, and on the letter it says you have 10 days to get back to us with the paperwork that we're requesting. 10 days is not a lot of time for the amount of paperwork that you have to give us. So I'll be honest, 10 days is not the date I look at. I probably don't even start looking at it until we get to the 20-day mark to see if anyone's given me any paperwork. Once you now you have to remember, I'm pulling a list of 50 people. I might only have 2 units to fill. So 48 people on that list are not getting housed. However, you have to give me all your paperwork. And even though the letter says you're being screened, I believe I didn't bring one of those, but I believe it says in there, please understand this is not an offer of a unit. But what it doesn't tell you is, there's only 2 units, you're one of 50 people and you're number 50 on the list, and But I will say, once the deadline comes, that the paperwork is due back, if number 2 gave us no paperwork and number 50 gave us all their paperwork, and nobody else gave us any paperwork, number 50 could be the one who gets housed if they're found eligible, because they gave us everything I needed to determine their eligibility. I will say I send out more letters of missing paperwork, so it's overwhelming when especially for the elderly, to get all this and to have to read it and understand it, it's discouraging. It's a lot of work. A lot of people get upset. I mean, I think we recently had someone in our office crying because they just didn't understand why we needed it all. I don't have this. I can't get you bank statements, So what I always say to people is, if you can't get us everything in 10 days, send me something. Send me the paperwork. Show me that you're working on it. Because if you send me nothing, I'm going to find you ineligible, because I have nothing to determine if you're eligible for housing. So the initial paperwork is the supplemental application. So once we get that, we get everybody's income. We then will send out landlord references so we require your last 5 years of landlord history or address history. Some people own homes, so there is no landlord to contact. We do all that first, and then if you're going to get to a point where you're going to be offered a unit, the last thing we do is run a query, because a court, we can only run it once. So I'm not going to run a query on you if I'm not even going to be offering you a unit right now. And Taffy, sorry, I went off on a little bit on the question that you asked. So Taffy, your question was, somebody sent in all the paperwork, you heard nothing. So what happens is you might not hear anything because we're going through at least 50 people's paperwork. And with 22 hours and 12 hours, there's not enough time in the day, because I'm not kidding, some people send in paperwork that's this high. So we have to go through it all. I got to make sure that we have it all. I've got to determine what you're missing. And if you are missing anything, you could get a letter that states, we've determined you're ineligible because you didn't send us everything. Because you get a list. It tells you what we need. So, but if you at least send me some of it, it shows that you're interested. Because I'll tell you, I've pulled so many lists that on a list of 50, I'm lucky if I have 2 that send me all the paperwork that I need. So I'm not going to send every single person a list listing everything they're missing, because you were given a list in the beginning of what we needed. So you may not hear anything until we've gone through your paperwork. If we have everything, you're not going to hear from us until we get to your name and possibly be offered a unit. If you gave us paperwork and we're missing anything, we will send you a letter eventually, not right away. So it does kind of give some false sense of, oh, I'm going to be housed. I got all my paperwork in. I'm going to be housed. Well, you might not. So, and the other thing that comes up a lot that people, whether they come in asking questions or they call, is, can I come see a unit? Because I'm not really sure I'd even want to live there. We don't. We can't show a unit because I don't even know if you're eligible. And if I showed everybody on our waiting list a unit, by 22 hours, I'd get nothing else done. So we don't. I get it that you might not like it, but we have many people on our waiting list that it doesn't matter. They need low-income housing. They're not going to be picky. Again, we are studio units. One big large room is your bedroom and your living room, and then of course you have a bathroom and a kitchen off of that. Some people set them up really nice. I mean, I think our units are beautiful. I really do. I think our location is great. I will say I don't know who built them back in the 70s and thought that 1,000,000 stairs was a good plan on a hill with ledge for elderly, because I will say, on the application it does ask you, do you need a unit without stairs? Well, if you can do a few stairs, I always tell people don't check that off, because I have units that have no stairs, I have units that have 5 stairs, I have units that have 10 stairs, and I have units that have 15 stairs. So some people can do the 5, but they can't do the 10. If you truly need a first floor, you have a walker and you can't do stairs, then you need to check off first floor unit only, but we only have a handful of true first floor units. And if you have a doctor's note that says you can't do stairs, I'm not going to be offering you a unit even if it has 5 stairs, because it clearly states that you can't do stairs. So if I had a situation where I did have a resident who applied, and she was offered a unit, and she had not checked off she couldn't do stairs. So when I went to show her the unit, and she got out of her car, and she had a walker, and I thought to myself, oh my goodness, so this unit is way out back. We got to walk because the parking is out here, and the units are over here. And then we get in, and we've got to go up 5 steps. I mean, it was clear that she couldn't do that. So I said, that's okay. What I need you to do is just, what happens is if you refuse a unit, unless it's for medical reasons, you lose whatever preference or priority you got to move in for 3 years. The only reason you can normally refuse it is for a medical reason. So what she did was she got a doctor's note that says she cannot do more than 5 stairs or 10 stairs. We'll try to work with you. Well, now she didn't lose her local preference. She's not going to be filled necessarily on that waiting list that she was pulled on, which means she's going to wait till another waiting list is pulled. And we don't pull them off them. They're a lot of work. They're a lot of work to, like I can pull one waiting list and fill 5 vacancies from it. I can fill 4 vacancies. I can fill 2 vacancies just from that one list. But if I don't fill, I have to tell the system, I'm pulling this list, I'm going to fill 3 units. If I don't fill those 3 units from that list, I have to pull another list. Because, right, another list of 50. I mean, I can do 10, but I can't get a waiver for that unit. If I don't fill it with those 10 people, now I got to pull another list, which means I won't get a waiver from the state for that unit. That answer your question on that? Any other? Yep.
I have a question. So that list that you pull from, it has to be a complete form. It can't be missing, say, bank statements or...
So yes and no. So I wish I didn't bring the supplemental application. So it'll have a list of things, and one of them will say, it does say 6 bank statements.
Yeah.
If you brought us everything but those 6 bank statements, you'll get a letter from us eventually that states, this is what you're missing. We need the 6 bank statements. We're now going to give you another deadline to get those to us.
Okay.
Because, and we're annoying, but it will say it has to be every page of your bank statement.
Yeah.
Even if it's the blank page or it's where you balance your checkbook, we just have to show we have every page, because sometimes people don't give us a page because they don't want us to see what's on the page. I know that sounds crazy, but it happens. I've seen it all, pretty much. I've seen people use their brother's DD 214 to get veterans preference, and said it was their husband. We require a marriage certificate as well, showing that you were actually, because people do try to work around the system. Not everybody, it just does happen, and I have to do my due diligence to be fair, so that people are being housed. The other thing I didn't mention too is local preference. You can get it in the town you live in or the town you work in. You can get it in both towns. So you live in Cohasset, you work in Hingham, and you're on both lists, you're going to get local preference on both of those waiting lists. If you're homeless, you can get local preference. You have to choose. You can get it from the town you were displaced from or the town you're temporarily living in. So that's local preference, veterans preference. Local preference, we have to be able to, you have to verify it. So if you say you work at Shaw's in Cohasset, but you live in Situate, I will need a letter from your employer stating that you work at the Shaw's that's located in Cohasset. The other piece, too, is as far as locals, a lot of people don't understand, and I'm not saying I agree with it because I didn't make the rules, but I get phone calls a lot from people who moved to Florida. They've been there a couple years, but they were born, raised their kids in Cohasset for 55 years, but they left. They don't get local preference. You have to be, it's in the regulations, you have to be a local at the time you apply and the time you're offered a unit. So, I get it. You lived here, you paid your taxes for 55 years, you went to Florida for 6 months, and you're like, I hate this, I'm coming back. Until you can prove that you're now living in Cohasset, move in with your sister. It's not my, and I always say that, they're getting out of me. I go, it's not my rule. I just have to go by what the rules are. So just because you lived here 55 years, if you don't live here right now, you're not going to get local preference.
Can you go home again?
Yeah.
Can you explain a little bit
Yeah.
what Corey is?
Corey? Yeah,
Corey,
so
I don't-
criminal, I forget what it's, all these acronyms, criminal something, something, something. Basically,
It's your
Criminal
criminal records.
offender.
a record, yes.
Criminal offender, yeah.
Criminal offender.
Criminal offender, record, and what's the I?
Probably are.
I can't remember what the I
I
is.
don't know.
Isn't that
Our
awful?
police chief doesn't know.
And I know you looked familiar. Okay, I was like, wait, I couldn't think of who you were, but I'm gonna look it up before I leave and let you know, because criminal.
It's basically, they check in criminal.
Investigate.
So yes,
Well, you got a criminal history and all that.
so
Anytime
What's
you
this
take,
Information.
like to volunteer
Correct.
for here.
you have to have, right,
a Cory.
you have to have a Cory
If you
run.
work for the Boy Scouts, you get Cory.
Exactly.
If you work for the state or for the school system.
I had to be Cory'd.
Cory,
Yeah,
Yeah.
You know, and I will say, I get a lot of people who will say, you know, I'll call them and say, now we're at the point you need to come in and fill out your Corey paperwork. And they go, oh, I'm the coach of my, you know, grandson's team. I already had a Corey run. I said, yeah, but we have to run it. You can't just bring in a copy that. And I will say, every housing authority has their own Corey policy. I mean, there's certain guidelines we have to follow by the state as far as what our Corey policy is. So I always tell people, don't, you know, on the application, it clearly asks, have you ever been convicted of a crime, I think is the question. I don't think it says felony. I think it says convicted of a crime. You know, the one thing I say to people is, you know, I don't care if you were 19 years old and now you're 79 and you stole a piece of candy and you were, whatever, it's on your Corey. Answer yes to that question, because if you answer no and it comes up on your Corey, now you've falsified your application, which is a reason for denial. You can also, you know, I find a lot, well, I shouldn't say a lot, but with the elderly, a lot of times, you know, I run their Corey and right now they're 80, they're in a wheelchair. Back when they were 17, they had a drinking and driving incident.
That's why I don't even remember it.
Exactly. You know, you can go in and have your request to have your record sealed.
Yeah.
I will say, I'm not speaking for any other housing authority, just because you did have a DUI 20 years ago doesn't necessarily mean you would be qualified or not qualified. It's all about, we look into it, you know, we determine, it depends on what the crime is. Obviously, you know, we're moving you into one of the most vulnerable populations. So, you know, I want to make sure that for everybody's sake that, you know, we're moving in someone that's, you know, wasn't just in the paper last week for, you know, whatever, there was a murder in Cohasset, right, a few years ago, so, you know.
Actually, there were two, I think.
Was it? Yeah. So we do. So that's the last thing we do. And again, once you move in, we can't run it again. However, it is in your lease, and it might even be in the regs, that if you do commit a crime, it can be considered a lease violation. You know, that gets involved. But initially, it doesn't, even if you have a Corey, it doesn't 100% mean you won't get housed.
I think the I is for information.
What's that?
Information, I believe, the I.
I isn't, you're right, I think you're right, yep, information.
Criminal offender record information.
Information, thank you. I'll tell you, there's so many acronyms. I just had a training the other day with my software system, and I forget what it was. It was like SOBI or SOHO, and I go, what is that? And he told me what it was. I go, can we just stop with the acronyms? I just can't keep up with them. I can't. It's like DHC, so we're overseen by the state, which used to be DHCD, which was the Department of Housing and Community Development. Now they're EO, I had to write it down because I can't even remember what it is. I forget what it is. I wrote it here somewhere.
Something like happiness.
Executive Office of something. I can't even remember. Yes, Community and Fair Housing. I still call them DHCD because I can't ever remember the EOHLC. They do.
And you're sitting, what the hell are they talking about?
Right.
It's like the military.
Huh?
Yeah.
Military,
Oh,
yeah.
yeah.
That's crazy. Any other questions? I know I kind of went off on a few different things.
No, I think you, all set?
Carrie, you
Good,
did.
don't forget.
And just to throw out there, if you ever have, you know, any question, you know, you did send in your paperwork, you've heard nothing, you know, if you can stop by our office. We now have a form that we have an applicant fill out requesting where they are on the list or status of their application. Just because if we constantly checked everybody's status, that would be the only thing we'd do as well. So we will check your status. We will, you know, we won't do it probably when you come in because it's a process, so we do have you fill out that form. If we don't get back to you, call us. We're only human. We do the best we can with the number of hours that we're given. So, good?
Thank you.
You're welcome.